Hi folks, Dave Schmidt here. It's the morning of October 3rd as I'm coming to you today. And the video and the radio program this week is going to be a special program. This is one that you're going to want to use as a reference tool. What I'm going to do is do a summary and a recap of what I have learned in the last 4 years. It was 4 years ago that I started doing these radio programs. And it was quite ironic how I got involved in this. It was not something that I went looking for. It was something that kind of found me. I started like you, many years ago. I purchased my first dinar in July of 2013. I was quite skeptical in the beginning because I always was applying 3 things that I had learned during my years of being in the legislature, of being a state senator. People would bring me ideas, they would want bills, and they would want legislation. And I always learned to ask these 3 questions. Number 1, follow the money. Number 2, how much of it is it going to cost? And number 3, who is going to be the opposition? Well, that's why I remained skeptical until it was in July of 2013. Some people had expressed and explained about the oil credit contracts. Well, that sounded very reasonable at that time. And like many of you, I jumped in and I was listening to TNT Tony and the others. And it sounded reasonable when they were saying, well, the dinar was going to be at $2 to $2.50. And then all of a sudden, within months, it went to $5 and $10 and $20 and $30 and even all the way up to $38 per dinar. And that's when I started applying those 3 questions. And I says, this is stupid. This is not realistic. That was a process that had me asking a lot more questions and started delving into a lot more of what was going on. Well, it was in the last week in September, 4 years ago. At that point, I had about 35 people on my list that I was helping out. And this article that had come out that was just really kind of stupid. And I realized, you guys are jumping all over this thing and there's no substance to it. See, I had a background in banking and finance. I worked in banking and finance. I worked in a bank. I understood the banking procedures. And I says, this is not normal. So I sat down to basically write, a letter to them saying, hey, back off. This is stupid. It isn't realistic. You guys are getting all up in arms about all kinds of stuff, putting all kinds of hope into something that ain't ever going to happen. As I sat down to write that letter, I felt that moment of what I would call inspiration come on me. And I ended up going for about 9 hours. It turned into what was called a 12-page letter that I had sent to my 35 friends. And still today, I don't know who had it posted on Dinar Recaps and one of the other blog sites. And the next thing that I know, this 12-page article, within 10 days, I had received over 1,000 emails in response, asking questions, and many people saying it was the best thing that they had ever seen and they had ever heard. At that time, it was very practical and it was very pragmatic. And here we are now, 4 years later. Funds have not been released. Things have dramatically changed. And what I have learned in those 4 years is totally different than from what I wrote that article 4 years ago. In fact, I took the article down because much of it doesn't apply anymore. But I'm still asking those 3 questions to everything that comes around because that is a foundation that I had learned. Many of you know that in my background, and I've shared this at the workshops, that I believe the first 59 years of my life prepared me for where I am today. I had a background in banking and finance, practical experience that was there. I'm a religion major in my undergraduate work, and I have a master's degree in biblical studies out of a seminary for my graduate school work. So I do have a background in practical religion and Christianity. Being a religion major, I was also able to study a lot of different philosophies and aspects. And also what I had studied what was called the development of myths. Now I'm going to get into that in just a moment. So I had the banking background, I had the religion and spiritual background, and I also spent 12 years as a state senator in Washington State. I should say 12 years in the legislature, ending as a state senator. So I understood government. I saw it from the inside. On top of that, I spent 25 years in the Army National Guard, and I am a retired military, person with retired military benefits. I understand government. I know it from the inside. I saw the shadow world, how it operates. But for so many years, I was just trudging along like everybody else. And then after I ended my legislative career in 2006, I went into a major real estate development project in 2008. And like everybody else, it crashed and I crashed. And I crashed with it. I lost everything that I had. I ended up having to file bankruptcy. I lost my home to foreclosure. But what that did, it started me on a road of discovery, of investigation. Because in the back of my mind, I was saying, wait a minute. These Wall Street professionals are the best financial people in the world. They should have known that this crash was coming. And when I started doing my investigation, I found out those bastards. This was a planned pump and dump from the very top. It was very top, powerful, controlling people that pumped up the debt, pumped up the debt, pumped up the debt on millions and millions of people here in America and around the world, and then crashed the system. And in the process, they became extremely wealthy. Billionaires were made out of that crash, while millions and millions of people like me suffered, and many of you did as well. Many of you lost your homes into foreclosure, or you found your mortgages underwater for 5 to 10 years and finding it very difficult to recover. That started me on a road to discovery. That started me on a road of doing more investigation, and it started me on a road of totally changing my perspective of how I viewed the world. And then I came into this currency exchange issue, and it was 4 years ago I started these radio programs. I came to you understanding, knowing what I knew at the time and explaining it. And the doors continued to open and the rabbit holes continued to develop for me to go down. In those 4 years, I have made 4 trips to Hong Kong and met with the dragon families and the elders. I've made 2 trips to Thailand and met with some very, what I call, top people. I've been introduced to sources of what I call galactic sources that are actually truly hybrids, and one of them specifically, Michael Lee Hill, I've developed a personal relationship with. I've come to understand the background of some of the absolute most brightest and smartest professors and scientists and intelligent people on this planet, primarily the Labyrinth Group and the ACIO and A.R. Borden and his associates. So I came in touch with the people who have more money than anybody in the world, and I came to be in touch with the brightest and smartest scientists in the world, that they were so sharp, so smart, so advanced, no government could touch them. I've also in this process developed relationships all along the way with the top funding sources, the top brokers, and the top bankers that are involved in this process. I still come back and I always say, ask those 3 questions. Now let me elaborate a little bit more about what I mean on that. The first question I always say is, follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. And the reason I ask these questions is to get to the root, to find out how practical is this, how realistic is it, and could it actually happen and take place. I want to get to the root of the truth. The first thing is following the money. Who's the sources of these money and where is it coming from? I'll get into that. Number 2 is, what is it going to cost? How much money is it going to take to carry out that plan or that scenario? And then number 3, who is the opposition to that plan from taking place? Or what are the practical logistics that have to happen for it to take place? Following the money, here's what I've discovered in the 4 years that I've been involved in this. Yes, there are dragon families that are very real. They trace their history back, going back over 8,000 years, if not even more. In the workshops, I'll tell you where the source of they are, who they are, where they came from, and how they came to be who they are. These dragon families, thousands of years ago, were basically appointed by what we would call different galactic sources who were using their influence to rule and control what was happening here on our planet. They were, and this you will find not just my opinion, it's also established in the ancient Sumerian tablets that are now coming to the surface in some of these recent archaeological digs. When I bring you this information, I always try to be as pragmatic and as practical as possible, coming from what I call tangible evidence or tangible history or tangible stories. There's substance to them, and these 3 questions help you get to those substance. So what we saw coming out of the ancient Sumerian records is that there were these dragon families. These are the royal bloodline families that come out of not just China. They come out of Europe, they come out of the Middle East, they come out of Asia, and they come out of China. And the ancient Sumerian tablets will tell us that these royal bloodline families, these dragon families, were appointed to rule over the humans until the right appointed time. Well, we're here now. Now is the right appointed time that we're having the shift and change. And these dragon families are in touch, or are in owners, or are custodians, or are guardians of money that is beyond our comprehension. I've met with them face to face. I've seen the pictures. I even had an opportunity in one of my trips to Hong Kong. I was to be taken into the single largest gold deposits here on the planet. And 2 days before I was to be taken in, the man that was going to take me in, there was an assassination attempt on his life. 3 times I was told I would be taken in, and every time there was huge opposition. Assassination attempts, people couldn't get on airplanes and make the trips, or others. The pictures that I've been shown would just blow you away. Value of gold, diamonds, assets, other jewels that are just beyond comprehension. I've seen pictures of what are called the true elders. These are elders that are 300, 400, and 500 years old. They either live in the Philippines or deep in the mountains of central China. And why are they that old? Because they've been able to shift and change their DNA to go beyond what creates the aging process. They are able to do that. There's very few of them, but they are. These are the true elders. So in following the money, I found that there were 3 primary sources of these funds, these dragon families and these elders. The second sources are those that are run and controlled by the governments. And these are all a part of what is called an international treaty agreement to basically pay for these currencies and these bonds. These will tell you, these sources will tell you that they derived these funds primarily from decades of being in these off-market trading platforms. Now, I have been told who started these platforms, why these trading platforms, why they were in place, and who basically runs and controls them today. And I'm telling it to you as it's been told to me. One of the original reasons, or the original sources of these funds, goes all the way back to the original Bretton Woods Agreement in 1943. When we look at what came out of World War II, Europe and Japan, they were devastated. They were totally devastated through the bombings and the war. And yet, where did they get literally the billions and billions of dollars to have a very fast recovery to their countries? It came out of these off-market trading platforms. That was the primary sources, the funds that rebuilt those 2 areas, or the areas that were devastated from World War II. So that's the second source. And the third source are some other private sources that have had access to these trading platforms. They don't have the huge sums, but they do have trillions. And here's what I've learned in all 3 of these sources, whether it's the elders and the dragon families, whether it's the government controlled, or whether it's the other privates. In all 3, there are what I call both black hats and white hats. We know and understand that there is basically what I refer to as the cabal, the controlling financial entities here on this planet. And to me, they're addicted to power and control, and they do control and attempt to control the money supplies here upon this planet. And I refer to them as the black hats. And then you have the white hats. Those are the benevolents that are here for humanitarian reasons, to help shift and change us as humanity. In these elders that you hear the stories about, there are white hats, and I've met with them face to face, and there are black hats. There are some of these elders that are flat out cabal and are funders of some of these cabal sources. When it comes to the governments, you have both sides. You have the white hats that are involved in the benevolent sources, then you have black hats. And then when you have the other private sources, you have again both. And that's because we live in a world of what is called duality consciousness or separation consciousness. And I talked about that on another video about 6 to 8 weeks ago. That appears and it applies in all the areas that we have here on this planet. There's always this duality that takes place. Those are the funding sources. And a lot of the reports that you are hearing are coming from different ones of these sources now. But let me explain a little bit more of what I've learned about the dragon families. When I started this about 3 years ago, I had someone get in touch with me that was called the ambassador, and that's all I'm going to say about that now. And he said that he was the ambassador for the Red Dragon. I communicated with them for over a year and a half. And if you noticed, I haven't talked with them for the last 2 years, and I don't communicate with them anymore. Why? After a year and a half of constant promises, 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 and never being able to deliver on anything that they promised, I realized they weren't following what I call these 3 questions, and they just weren't lining up, and there was something about that that wasn't quite accurate. Since then, I had a contact, and it was back in January, and you can go back to my YouTube or my website videos, and in the first week in January, I had a gentleman on the program that I called Mr. M. I was not allowed to give his real name. Mr. M has some pretty deep sources. Mr. M, as you know, was a man that worked inside the CIA for 9 years. He worked inside the Pentagon, and I put him into the category of being a genius. Not only is he a genius, he is a master at developing computer programs, and also he's a very, very deep spiritual man. Mr. M is a part of a team, and I have over the last 6 and 8 months been learning more about this team and who they really are. I'm not allowed to go into the freedom to talk about who they are, but here's what I do know. It was a couple of months ago I met face-to-face with the man that Mr. M introduced me to, that he says he is the son of the real Red Dragon, and he is also the one who is in charge and is the primary signer in the largest trust in the world. I sat next to him and saw pictures that would just blow you away. In the conversation, he also told me that he had a meeting face-to-face with the president and the CEO of HSBC Bank in Hong Kong. And he told him, he says that CEO said to him, "You have more money in our account, in our bank, than anybody in the world. You have more money in our bank than the Queen." That tells you a lot. I began to realize the depth of what was there. And I asked him about, well, who is this other Red Dragon and this ambassador and these others? And he proceeded to explain to me the structure. He said there are 9 primary senior elders, and these are the ones that make the absolute top decisions. And when you hear stories about all these other elders, what you don't know is that underneath that 9 are 9 and 9 and 9, and it goes down to multiple levels. If you are hearing stories coming from grandfathers or from elders that just don't seem to make much sense, is because they probably are very legitimate, but they're in the lower parts of the structure and they have absolutely no authority to make any decisions. When I asked him about the ones that I had been acquainted with for a year and a half, he says, that's where they are. Because see, I found out the information they gave me about the history of the dragon families was correct. But what they were leading me to and others to believe is that they said that they were in authority and decision, and they're not. Now, I'm going to quote him of what he told me. They're just very low-level family members who are brokers out trying to make a buck and trying to use their name to give influence over to people to put them into a greater position of status. They have absolutely no authority to make any decisions. That doesn't mean that they may not have money down the road, but they have no decision-making authority. Those are the dragon family sources. As of now, I have 6 different contracts in the currency exchanges, and I have contracts in each of those 3 different primary funding sources. The second one are those that are involved with the governments, and they're involved with the international treaty agreement over the release of these funds through currencies and through bonds. I have a second-hand contact with them. I'm not allowed to be in direct contact with them. They have explained to me where the money came from, how they got this money, and where it was derived from. These are very real people, very tangible sources. I trust them. They are also representatives of an international bank that is based in another part of the world. I'm not at liberty to go and talk about who they are, but let's just say they're very, very well established. The top individual, it's basically his wife that is a part of the Dragon family clans in the history that goes back hundreds of years, and that's how he became involved in this. And then his associate that I get to talk with on a regular basis, he's one that's been involved in very, very large financial transactions. He knows about the global collateral accounts, and he's also been in touch with some of those sources. That's all I want to say on that. The third sources are some smaller trusts that are based in different places around the world, and they basically have developed their funds out of these off-market trading platforms. Now, we've also been told that Reno is the center of what goes on, and that is true. But we need to be very clear. In Reno, there are both black hats and there are white hats involved in there. In the government sources, there are black hats and there are white hats. And again, in the Dragon families, there are black hats and there are white hats. There are some that are operating in our benevolent cause, and there are some that are using this to feed their addiction of power and control. I have done everything that I can to make sure that I know who I am involved with, and I would not take you there if I did not have the highest confidence in who I was associated with. So the first thing is says you follow the money. And then the second thing is you do the math. Now, if you've been reading in some of these different organizations that you may already be involved with, or some of the stuff that's taking place on the blog sites, when they tell you about what's going on and you want to do the math, folks, I'm telling you, that just plain flat out is not going to happen. You've got, and these are not bad people. They're good people. They have good intentions, but the scenarios that they are developing are just so unpragmatic, unrealistic, it ain't ever going to happen, because they're telling you that you can take your Zim and you will probably get $1 on it, and you're going to take 100 trillion Zim note and you're going to get $100 trillion. Well, who's got these quadrillions of dollars that's going to pay for that? Where is that money coming from? And I can tell you right now, in all three of the sources that I am in contact with, none of them are going to release that kind of money, or they don't have it. The elders are not releasing that kind of money. If you're hearing that report, in my opinion, that is coming from sources that are intended to entrap you. And it seems like every 3 weeks or a month we hear a different story about how it's going to be dispersed, how it's going to be distributed. There's going to be a 20-80 split, and then you're going to get 1% of it, and the other part is going to end up staying in one of the banks. We'll come back to how tangible is that information. So what we're saying is this bank gets to have hundreds of quadrillions of dollars sitting in its bank, and it's going to pay you out 1%. Please, folks, what is the practical outcome of that? That's why I say do the math. Follow the money. How realistic is the money? Where is the money coming from? And do the math to how much it's going to cost to fulfill those types of arrangements. And that will tell you something about the practicality of whether or not that is going to happen. Now, the other thing I says, who's the opposition? Or how realistic is that going to happen? Believe me, there have been financial controllers, the cabal of the financial systems in our world for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I can tell you right now, they are not just sitting down, walking away, and allowing this new system to come in. They have developed everything they can to have huge opposition to these funds being released and coming to us. They have tried what they can at every area, every angle, every avenue to stop it. And in my opinion, that's why they are putting out false information. It's just that, very false information. But it sounds tangible, it sounds good, it sounds seductive, and it sounds very alluring until you ask those three questions and follow its source and realize, how realistic is this? I've done my homework, folks. I've developed my relationships. I've been involved in this. And I want to go back to the interview that I had with Mr. M in January. He talked about he and a team of others had done the work, developed the computer programs to bring in the new banking systems to make this safe. They wanted to implement that system shortly after 9/11, about 15, 16 years ago, and they were flat out stopped by the cabal. And they have been stopped ever since then. But what I can say is it's very, very close. All the sources that you talk to, do you know any of them that are here publicly coming out on the air and they've had an assassination attempt on their life? I didn't share this until recently, the full details of it. But many of you know, is back in January, I was in a motorcycle accident. That accident happened 2 days after I had Mr. M on the air. That was a deliberate attempt to assassinate me and take me out, and not wanting me to move forward in my relationship with him and my conduct with him. Because see, the real, I call it opposition, the real cabal, they know who he is. They know how strong he is. They know the ability that he has to bring this change. And when they found out that I was associated with him, they wanted to take me out. That's the depth that I've had. And Mr. M, as I said, is involved with the team. And the one man that I talked to, he is the son of the real Red Dragon. He is the son of the real source. Now here's what's interesting in all this, because as I've been able to get right at the top of, the son of the real M1, I've been able to get right to the top of the government folks. I've been able to go right to the top of some of these other funding sources. In a recent conversation that I had with Mr. M, I was saying, these people are the top sources of the money, but yet they don't get to move it. None of them seem to have the authority to be the final decision maker on when this is going to happen. Now, I'm going to share what was explained to me. How you believe this is your choice, how you want to understand it is your choice, that's true. And he said to me, you're absolutely right. But I can tell you, the man that you sat down with face to face, he showed you the pictures, he told you the story, you were with him for 2 hours, he's the top decision maker. But he's not the final decision maker. Because see, he goes to sources above him. And he's waiting for when they are going to give the ability to be released for their funds. Now, I want to be clear about that. I said that. Their funds. These extremely large trusts where this money funnels down. And he flat out told me he is a gentleman that has frequent communications with angelics, angels, and galactic sources that are far above what takes place in this physical third-dimensional world, and he's waiting for the word from them. That's the real decision. Now, why has there been such delay in this? These elders understand the principle of what's called the lottery syndrome. The bottom line is we have a dramatic history of when people come into sudden wealth. And I shared with you a couple months ago the book Sudden Wealth Syndrome that talks about this man who did professional history and research of interviewing and investigating people who came into sudden wealth, and how 80 to 90% of the people don't know how to handle a vast amount of money coming into their possession. The history of people who win the lottery, it shows that within 3 to 5 years, over 80% of them have either lost the millions or have misused it and misplaced it, and they are back to where they were before they came to money, or they're in worse condition before they came into these millions. It's obviously humanity has had a very tragic and horrible history of being able to handle massive amounts of wealth coming into their possession. These elders know that. And what happens is when this money gets released, and let's go back to the lottery syndrome again, they get these millions of dollars, they waste it, they misappropriate, they don't use it wisely, and after 3 to 5 years, they're right back to where they were. But where did all that money go? It goes through the money financial system and ends up in the hands and the control of the cabal controllers. Because the money, the massive amounts of wealth, always gravitates back to their power and their control. And the elders have known that. And they have known they were not ready to release these trillions and quadrillions of dollars until that system was safe, until they could have confidence that releasing this kind of money to thousands and thousands of us, we would not get caught into the lottery system complex. We would not be a problem, what is called, the sudden wealth syndrome, and that these trillions and quadrillions of dollars would not gravitate back to the control of the cabal and the elite. They've been working on this, my understanding is, since the original Bretton Woods Agreement in the 1940s. They've been working for almost 25 to 30 years on fixing the banking system. And what I can say is it appears we're finally there, after decades of work to bring this about for us. I want to share with you something that I had in a phone call conversation yesterday. I have made 7 trips to Reno. I have contacts that are there. I'm a personal friend with the man that is the largest currency broker in the world. I have seen what is called the CIS statements. I have seen the pictures. I've seen the documentations. When I've told you the story that there are over 600 million boxes of dinar out there, and there's 1 billion dinar in each box. This isn't just a story. This is hard fact, tangible evidence. We know where those boxes, the majority of them, are stored, where they're located, and where these warehouses at the different places around the world. That's how much is out there, folks. And that's why I've been sharing with you that they were massively overprinted, they were massively oversold, and that's why the buyers, for the most part, aren't buying dinar anymore. Excuse me, my nose is itching, okay? I've got the evidence of that being there. Well, in one of my sources that I had with Reno, we found out that yes, over a period of the last year and a half, we were given information that, the paymasters had the money was in the bank accounts. And we later found out those were fabricated accounts. They were made, they were false. It was deliberate false information that was being passed on to us. We talked about it and we became extremely careful. And we said, we're not going out there until we absolutely know that there's real substance to what's going on here. Well, here's what he told me. One of his associates, on a smaller contract, he said the man spent 4 hours in the bank on Friday and he was paid. This is the first, what I'd call hard, tangible, substantial report of somebody really being paid. I've heard reports of others, but I haven't been able to develop the tangible evidence on it. He said this man was in Reno for 5 weeks waiting to get paid. He was in the bank on Friday, and he's leaving Reno tomorrow with money in his bank account. That's the first time we've heard that. Also, some of my sources that work with the government treaty, those are all the treaty contracts, I talked with them in the last couple of days, and they flat out said, we have been put on a very, very deep blackout. I can't talk to you about it. I can't tell you what's going on, but all I know, this is the first time they have been placed in that condition. That's very positive news to me. That's what's developing, and that's what's happening in this process. Now, another thing I want to talk about so I can help people to understand is, why do we seem to have so much false information or unreliable information that's coming from very, very good people? It's the process of what I call the development of myths. I did some study on this because most religions are very deeply in what is called myth development. Well, when you go back and you look at the dictionary definitions and the tangible stuff, and you go to Wikipedia and what it talks about in myths, it will tell you this. Myths are stories that develop within social or cultural groups, and they expand to take on a life of their own. They usually start with a couple aspects of very good tangible evidence or basis of fact, but then they expand from there and become very unreliable. The classic example of a myth is if you have 10 people sitting in a circle, and you know what happens is that one person whispers something into the ear of the person next to them, others can't hear it, and then they start spreading that all the way around. And by the time it comes all the way back around the circle, the story is a lot different than how it started. That's how myths are developed. People take on a practical aspect of something that has tangible, i.e., there's very real dragon families out there. And then all of a sudden these people start spreading stories about dragon families, about these currencies, about how much is out there, about the banks and everything that's going to go on. And folks, the vast majority of what is taking place out there on the internet and the blog sites are myths. But the issue is myths are not necessarily propagated by what we would call cabal or black hat people. They're propagated by very honest, very good intended people. They're just sharing stories. And the stories go around the circle, and by the time it comes out onto the blog sites, it has very little practical reliability to it. Question number 3. Who's the opposition? And what are the practical logistics that that story would ever happen? Hello? Who has the hundreds of trillions or quadrillions of dollars to pay for the Zims at the rates that are being talked about out there? Who is it that's going to turn 30, 40,000 people into the new super wealthy elite where they're going to get millions and billions of dollars in their pocket based on the rates that are talked about? Who has the money that's going to pay $3 and $3.50 per dinar for the 600 million boxes of dinars that are out there, the quadrillions of dinars that are out there? Who has that money? Let's go back to what's happening in Iraq. If there's going to be a public exchange, where's Iraq going to come up with the quadrillions of dollars to pay for the increase in it? Iraq has absolutely no obligation whatsoever, none, to pay anybody a penny for the dinar that has been sold. Why? The dinar is not a tradable currency on the open foreign exchange market. The only place that the dinar has value is inside the country of Iraq. You take that dinar outside of Iraq, it's basically worthless paper. Now, people will give value to it, people will exchange it, people will pay for it. But when you have a 25,000 dinar note and people are saying it's going to get $3.50, dollars per dinar, let alone the prices above it, that means each one of those is going to pay $90,000. Excuse me, folks, that's a myth of major proportion. The Zim being traded at it is a myth of major proportion. As I have mentioned, I am in touch with the real funders. Everything that comes from the 3 funding sources that I have is, number 1, my sources of the Elders in the Dragon family says we are not here to create a new super wealthy 1%. We are here to fund projects, and yes, we will help individuals be relieved of financial burdens and obligations, but we are not here to pay off the global debt. That may happen over an extended period of time of a number of years, but don't expect it to happen as a single event. That is a myth, folks, because there's no substance to who's going to pay for it and where the money's going to come from. What happens if all of a sudden they pay off all of the global debt? That creates, on a practical scenario, a catastrophe of global financial issues because it has massive unintended consequences. The global economic system is not established to move that kind of money without dramatic consequences and events. That is why I believe we will see these funds released in a step-by-step process over a number of years. They will be careful about how they release it, and they will watch what it is going to do for the global economy so it doesn't create hyperinflation all around the world. And you better believe that our federal government, the U.S. Treasury, and Homeland Security is going to control how much money gets to be released into the economy. If not, it creates a very deep security interest for the national security interest of our country because it creates massive hyperinflation to release too much money. That is why I am saying the scenario is so different than what we all thought it was 3 to 4 years ago. This is a scenario, in my opinion, the money is going to be released in a slow, step-by-step basis. It's only going to happen in the private exchanges. Don't expect a huge public exchange. If the Iraqi dinar comes onto the open market, you probably aren't going to get much more than what you paid for it. That's my opinion. And I think I back that up with very substantial, tangible evidence, and I take it through that 3-step process, and I make sure it's not just a myth or a story that is developed. I want to talk about another illustration. We are constantly hearing about Nasara. Take Nasara through these 3 steps. Who's got the money to pay for the quadrillions of dollars to pay off all the debt? It ain't happening. It isn't out there. In a real practical world, it isn't out there. The other parts of Nasara, who's the dictator that's going to force 535 members of Congress to walk off the job? You think that's and violate our U.S. Constitution in the process of what is called a due process of law and the right of the vote of the individual that's based upon our Constitution. That is not going to happen, folks. I can tell you they will go down screaming and fighting to the nth degree before they are forced to leave office. Based on the Constitution, there is only 2 ways that a person can be removed from Congress. Number 1, the voters of the people in their congressional district. Number 2, by a vote of their own members because they have violated a law or committed a crime and they need to be removed for that reason. But it takes a vote from their own constituency, their own membership. Congress is the only one that can remove a member of Congress that is not by the vote of the people. And folks, that is extremely rare. If 535 members are going to be removed, who's the dictator that's going to do it? The only way that could happen is a massive, bloody military coup takeover in our country. And you know what? That ain't going to happen. When you come back to the concepts of Nasara, when you come back to the concepts of the new republic that's going to come into place, trace its root. Where did all this come from? And you will find that those are stories, myths that developed with militia-based groups in a couple of primary states. They developed these stories, and then it took on mythology aspects. Expanded, to the point where you've got channeling messages that are going to say it's going to happen. Well, I can go into that, and that's another whole story. We might see this happen over an extended period of time on a step-by-step basis, but do not expect it to happen overnight. When you come back to myths, when you come back to stories like the quadrillions of dollars, when you come back to, the Nasaras and stuff like that, what makes people believe in that? At the end of the day, it's what's called the savior complex. You see, we go deep into our subconscious mind, and underneath there is a lot of deep fear, and a lot of deep guilt, and a lot of very deep insecurities. And out of that, we have a tendency to project something that we're looking for that will come and rescue us and save us from these deep fears and insecurities. And it's called the savior complex. In religious aspects, we look for saviors. Now remember, I was a religion major, and I have a master's degree in biblical studies. I know my Bible very well. And I'm going to make a statement that some people are going to be a little bit upset with me, but it's very clear to understand. The Bible that is before us is not the message and the teachings of Jesus. It is the message and the teachings, predominantly the New Testament of the Apostle Paul, and what was developed out of him at the councils of Nicaea in 300 and 400 AD to decide what was going to be in the Bible and what theologies they were going to develop. It's predominantly the theology and the aspects of the Apostle Paul, and then with the Gospels placed into it based on how they saw the life of Jesus. We have other sources that are coming out that are giving us a much, much different picture of who he truly was and what his true teachings really are. And that's why I come back to the great sources that I refer to as A Course in Miracles and the books by Gary Renard. Because there you see what is the true sources of the teachings of Jesus. And that's why I refer to them. And this has been a development process of my own life over a number of years. At the workshop, I share a couple slides about what is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you have a deeply entrenched belief system. Something comes up that is contrary or in opposition to that, and you have a really deep problem making the shift and accepting that, even though it's hard evidence, because to accept it is very painful, it's very disturbing, and it's out of line with this deeply attached belief system that you have developed. So therefore what you do is that you take this new evidence and you just kind of let it go over your head as though it doesn't exist. The classic example of cognitive dissonance on a national scale are those that are still believing that 9/11 was done by 19 Arabs with box cutter knives. It's those that are still believing that it was a 757 plane that hit the Pentagon. It's those that are still believing that it was jet fuel, i.e. kerosene, that made the towers fall at the rate of gravity. And I can go on and on and on about that. The evidence, the tangible evidence is so obvious that all three of those towers were controlled demolitions, and it was a missile that hit the Pentagon, not a plane. But cognitive dissonance keeps people from wanting to believe that, because then what they have to accept was it was our own people that basically did that, and not 19 Arabs with box cutter knives. That's very painful. It's very disturbing. It was for me, because when 9/11 happened, I was serving in the National Guard at that time, and I was in that cognitive dissonance. I actually believed what the news was telling me. I was in the National Guard, and I was ready to put on my uniform and go kill those bastards. That's how I felt about that. And when some friends started telling me, do your own work, do your own investigation, take a look at this with hard, tangible evidence, it took me 2 to 3 months to work through my own cognitive dissonance to come to the point in realizing those bastards. This was a planned, deliberate operation to create absolute havoc and chaos for them trying to keep power and control over humanity. There's a whole lot of cognitive dissonance, folks, that's going on around these currency and bond exchanges. And there's a lot of you that don't want to face into the truth. You don't want to face into the fact that the vast majority of the stories are myth developments. They're good people. They have good intentions, but they don't ask these 3 questions, and they don't do their homework. And they aren't willing to face in to the unpractical, unrealistic aspect that they could ever happen that way in a very world, 3rd-dimensional, tangible, real world. That's why I am saying that this scenario has changed dramatically. This scenario is no longer what we thought it was, that you're going to be able to turn in your currencies and become massively wealthy. And we do not have an absolute story of how it's going to happen, because we don't know, and we will not know until the first round of funds are released. When the first round of funds are released, the funders and the government controllers are going to step back and see, what is this doing to the global economy? They don't want to release too much too fast. Now, as I sat down with the son of the Real Red Dragon, and the conversations I've had with him and his team, they were very direct with me. They said, Dave, we have been watching you and observing you now for over a year. We love what you do with your people in your workshops. We love what you do with your people in your radio programs and these videos. We understand that you are here first and foremost for what is called spiritual development and evolvement, and these funds are just a tool to help shift and change our world and change humanity. We understand the need to put money out there to fund these humanitarian aid projects all around the world. And the man in charge looked right at me and he said, your people, with you and those of you on your list in the Sedona Connection, will be the first people that we will fund. We don't have those details yet. As of now, it appears it's going to come out in a step-by-step process. And that's why I've been talking about there will have to be a priority listing, because on my list I have over 12,500 people who have signed up. I have about 7,000 or 8,000 that are active every week and showing that they're active. And believe me, once the word gets out that funding's happened, and once the word comes out it's coming through our channels, that list will grow and expand, and people will all of a sudden become very active because they'll be at the source of the funds. Now, that does not mean that other things can't happen, because I want to come back again to those 3 funding sources. There are other sources of funds, but they're much smaller, they're much lower, and they're not happening on the large scale in the thousands. That's why the gentleman I talked with yesterday said, yes, this individual got paid for his Zim. It was it was only a few people, a very small number got paid yesterday. It's because they are in a separate contract with a different funding source that is not really large. Folks, that is kind of the summary of where I've been in the last 4 years. And I want to say thank you to all of you that have been here with me in this process, the faithful ones that have been there. I'm sharing the information to you from what I've learned in these 4 years and the people that I've met with and the rabbit holes that I've been down. And I try very diligently to do my work to make sure that my information is reliable. I'm not here to get into the myth development. I try to totally stay away from the myths. If sometimes there have been things that I'm starting and I'm going with the information that I have at that time, the relationships that I developed at that time, but I later find out was a myth. And if you notice, if I'm not working with them, if I'm not communicating with them, if I'm not talking about them, it's probably because I found out they were deeply involved in the myths and they were not involved in tangible evidence or practicality of what they were talking about. And that's why I moved on. I'm not here to attack them. I'm not here to criticize them. In some ways, I'm here to say thank you, because I would not be here today where I am today if I had gone down that path with them. It was the path that I went on at the time that has gotten me and us to the place of where we are today, of knowing that the money is very tangible, the money is very real, these people are very real, and there's a very real plan, but it is a detailed plan, it's a methodical plan, and it's a plan to make sure that it impacts the whole world, not just the thousands of us here that are wanting money and wanting it now. So if you're in a situation where you're hurting financially, if you're in a situation that's wondering why this isn't happening, then all I can say is please be patient. One of the things that was inferred to me from this team was this money being released is first and foremost about the involvement and the development and the spiritual progress of the human race. The physical money is just a tool. There are physical aspects to it, but the biggest thing is about the shift and change of our consciousness and the shift and change of our heart. My message to you is, if you're living in fear, if you're living in anxiety, if you're living in worry, and if you're living in desperation for money, then go fix your heart. Let go of the fear. Process the energy of fear. Let go of the anxiety. Let go of the desperation. Let go of the sense of need. Those are just mindsets that will keep you there. And what it was inferred to me is that they are looking at the much, much bigger picture. They're looking at the picture of when there is enough people that are collectively in the right mindset, in the right consciousness, in the right heart conditions, that the energy that I talked about 6 weeks ago, it's what's called this heart consciousness energy. It's a quantum energy field. When that is strong enough that it will subdue and shove aside all the opposition, and that we won't have the lottery complex problem. We won't have the misuse and the misrepresentation of the funds where it flows back into the hands and the control of the cabal. That's when they're going to release the funds. This is information I've known now for about 1.5 to 2 years. I've been waiting to release this information, and it appears that we are there. I can't give you exact dates. I can't give you exact amounts. I do not know, because it's a multiple-tiered, multiple-step process. But the very tangible evidence in the phone call that I had yesterday, that an individual was paid a large sum of money, and the money is in a real bank account, and it's really spendable. And that the others and myself had been put on a blackout notice to go quiet. Every time that happens, it's very positive news. So folks, that's my summary of the 4 years of this journey that we've been on together. And I'm probably more excited, more in anticipation, feel more confident than ever before that this is going to happen. Just don't think it's going to happen by the mythological stories that are out there. I don't know anybody at this time that has an exact description how this is going to take place, because it takes place on a step-by-step basis. This is a video that I would encourage you to listen to more than once. This is a video that I would encourage you to share with other people. This is a video that I would say that will be a foundational one, because basically it's been the recap and the summary of the 4 years that I've been involved in this. That's brought us up to the point of where we are today. I'm anticipating some good news happening in the next 2 to 4 weeks. I'm anticipating the fact that in one of my very small contracts, I may get the word later today or tomorrow that funding is ready to move forward. I sure hope so. I'm anticipating it just as you are. All I can say is focus on the primary purpose of this mission. It's about who we are as a human race. We are the ones that are getting to be the trailblazers, the forerunners, to lay a foundation to shift and change our world, because it's time. It's time for humanity to make a major shift in it. And the use of funds is a very big part of that. Okay? Thank you very, very much. Thank you for listening to this. And I want to know that you are all very, very deeply loved. All right. Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.